elect the next leader. They went with the Islamic Caliphate. The other line became known as the Shiites. They said it should stay in the Prophet's bloodline. The first Shiite Imam was Imam Ali, and then it went to the next 12 Imams until the 12th Imam disappeared. And the Shiites believed that they were supposed to wait the return of the 12th Imam, and he was supposed to lead the Shiite society. Now, Shiite Islam remained this way for about 1,000 years until the rise of the Safavid Empire. The Safavid Empire, this modern day Iran, they were initially Sunni. However, just this west of the Safavid Empire was a rising Ottoman Empire. Shah Ismail of the Safavid Empire, he wanted distance between themselves and the rising Ottoman Empire. That way, the Ottomans couldn't control them because the Ottomans were becoming a powerhouse. So they decided that what they're going to do is they're going to convert the Safavid Empire from Sunni Islam to Shiite Islam. So what Shah Ismail did is he began importing Shiite clerics from Lebanon because that's where Shiite Islam was dominant during his day. And he started bringing them to the Safavid Empire and encouraging everyone in his empire to convert to Shiite Islam. He did things like court appointments, used government funds to build Shiite mosques, money incentives, and any other incentives you could think of to make the Safavid Empire Shiite. And as we know that he was successful in converting the Safavid Empire. So with this, the Safavid Empire became the first Shiite theocracy. And the Shiite Islam remained this way for the next 400 years. This is what we come to Ali Shariati. Ali Shariati, he was born in the year 1933 in Kahak, and this is a village in northeastern Iran. His family, they were very pious people because childhood friends said that they never saw his mother or sister go outside without their faces veiled. So even his best friend doesn't even know his mother or sister looked like. And his father was also a proponent of something called Islamic socialism. Because socialism, especially in Europe, it took up a very non-religious stance. Many people with Islamic background in Middle Eastern society did not like that, so they had this concept called Islamic socialism. Ali Shariati's father created an organization called the Society of God Worship, Coalition of Society of God Worshiping Socialists. So they're bringing in socialism and Islam together. So Ali Shariati's background, a very pious family and a politically active family. As Ali Shariati became older, he went to the University of Tehran to study Persian, Sufi, and Shiite literature. Upon graduating, he took advantage of the Shah's overseas programs to go to the University of Paris to study literature. Because the Shah, he was sending people overseas overseas for education and then bringing them back because he wanted Iran to be educated. Ali Shariati took advantage of those programs. And so upon returning to Iran, he really began to talk about his reinterpretation of Shiite Islam. It goes by several different names. One of them is Alawite Shiism, another is Hussein Shiism, another is Red Shiism. You will see these words used interchangeably, but they're effectively the same thing. So one of the aspects of his reinterpretation of Shiite Islam was he denounced the clerics. Because Ali Shariati said that the clerics bringing Safavid Shiism was elevating the clerics and the Shah to the Imams. Because before the Safavid Empire came in, again, there was never a Shiite theocracy. You had the Prophet Muhammad at the top, then you had the 12 Shiite Imams underneath them. And then you had everyone else beneath the Imams and the Prophet Muhammad. Ali Shariati said that the Safavid Shiism, also known as Black Shiism, is a Reinterpretation Shiism because it elevated the clerics and the Shah, made them equal to the Imams. So rather than being a bottom-up religion like it was for nearly 1,000 years, it became a top-down religion. As he said, with this top-down coming in, because the Shah Ismail, he's the one who wanted to push it. So he says Shiism went from protecting the people, protecting the ruling class and the aristocracy, which is an inversion of what Shiism was supposed to be. And the clerics were pushing an inverted version of Shiite Islam, which goes against what the Imams taught and what the Prophet Muhammad taught. And so there was a few things that he denounced. One of them was he denounced mainly the clerics who were opposed to modernization. Because during the time of Ali Shariati, many clerics are opposed to like television, radio, cars, anything modern, because they said, this is from the West, we are not Westernized, we are Muslims. Ali Shariati compared it to, quote, a child who closes his eyes when he walks out of the room, refusing to believe there's any danger in front of him. Because what Ali Shariati pointed out was soon after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam became the center of science in the world. So he's saying by blocking this modernization, we're going directly against what the Prophet Muhammad taught. Islam was never opposed to science, and the Imams were also never opposed to science. So the clerics are not properly following the religion. He also criticized the clerics because they could not function outside their paradigm. Because what he would say is a lot of these clerics, they'd go to their mosques and you'd have to be part of their little group to really for them to associate with you. He said that this is not what was taught by Islam, because he said the prophets always they spoke to everybody. They didn't just focus on their little groups. Because he said especially children raised in these little groups, as they get older, they're not going to know how to function in society. He compared it to a fish raised in a fish tank. And once they leave the fish tank and get into the ocean, they're going to be swept away. And this is pushing people away from Islam. Another one is to denounce the superstition that was spread by the clerics. Because two of my beliefs that made that, I'm not saying all their clerics believe this, but two of my things that were taught was one, through a prayer, one can turn their enemies into cockroaches. He said there's no basis for that in Islam. He also said that through many clerics said through prayer, you can make yourself instantly rich. Again, they said there's no basis for this. Another criticism that he had of clerics was that they're only writing in Arabic. As we know, the Prophet Muhammad, he was Arab and he wrote in Arabic. So many of the clerics said, we need to write in Arabic because that's what the Prophet Muhammad did. Shariati said, no, Islam is supposed to be for the people. Iran, they speak Farsi. If an Iranian can't speak Arab, how is he supposed to know the word of God? No, you're supposed to reach out to many people, not just the people who know Arabic. Because again, it is of the people and for the people. So these are some heavy denouncements that Shariati had to clerics. Okay. So the clerics, obviously, they did not like being denounced because they thought we've gone to the seminar schools, we know what we're talking about, who are you to denounce us? There were three waves of denouncements that went out against Shariati. The first wave of denouncements happened in 1972. And what they did is they wrote a 9-page document to the university that Shariati was speaking at, denouncing him. This first wave of announcements, Shariati was not very well known by this time, so it was more focused on the local mosques and a lot of the local clerics, because there were 5 of my clerics in this time who really took the lead in denouncing him for the next 4 years. Because first they accused Shariati of not having the proper religious credentials, and therefore he was training apostates. Because as Shariati, he was a sociologist, and he went to the University of Paris. They're saying, hey, he has not been to these seminars and poems. He is not properly credentialed to speak out against us. He does not know what he's talking about. So therefore, these people who are following him and believing him, they are not properly trained. Therefore, they are apostates. Because some of the clerics, they said, we're better off having sinful people than we are having apostates. Another ones, they viewed Shariati as an arrogant Westerner teaching based on his foreign education. So they said, he's bringing West doctrification into Iran and into our teachings. These teachings are not Islamic, they're not in Saudi Arabia, they're not in Qom. These are Western teachings and they have no place. And then, to prove this, he pointed out that many women attending his lectures were women who wore miniskirts. Because especially if you attend the seminars in Qom, you don't wear miniskirts, you go in there properly dressed and properly veiled. In Shariati's lectures, a lot of women wore miniskirts. And they're saying, look at what he's doing. He's corrupting Islam, he's corrupting society. Shariati, this act response made him very, very angry. He said, so what if they're wearing miniskirts? If it bothers you, don't look at them. So he did not like that. He said, but Islam is supposed to speak to everybody, regardless of their background. They're not supposed to form their own little societies. And then Shariati will also respond. He says that he was not infallible, and if the clerics can prove him wrong, he will change his opinions based on the facts. So this is not even despite this did not stop the denouncements coming. This became the second wave of denouncements. Now, this is where you start to see more high-level clerics in the Qom seminaries. They're the ones who started coming out against Shariati. These attacks, these were much more academic and framework than the ones for the local mosques were. Yeah, because one of them, Shariati, he called into question the theoretic concept of government consultation. He said, no, this should be for everybody, not just for a few people. And so the clerics responded with, if you're calling into question the government consultation, you are calling into question the line of the imams, and therefore you are questioning the very basis of Shiite Islam, and this is un-Islamic what you're doing. Shariati did not agree with that assessment. A second one is Shariati said that the forbidden fruit that Adam and Eve ate in the Garden of Eden, what they gained was awareness. Well, that's what the clerics taught. But Shariati pointed out that the Quran says that we are endowed with knowledge, therefore that was not the forbidden fruit that they ate. in the garden even. So these attacks, again, they are much more academically frameworked than the previous attacks were. And to do this attack, they use well-respected and popular journals, such as the Darsh al-Is Maktab Islam and Darsh al-Is Maktab in these two journals. And the clerics went on to accuse al-Shariati of imposing his will on the Quran. They said, look, you're not following the Quran properly, you do not have the proper religious credentials, you're an ideologue, and you are selectively editing what you want. So you are imposing your will on the Quran, and you will find a special place in hell for what you are doing. Al-Ash'ari said, no, what the clerics had done is an inversion of what Shiite Islam was for almost 1,000 years until the rise of the Safavids. And so al-Shariati during this time, he still maintained his positions against the clergy, and he prepared himself for religious rulings, and he went into hiding. Now, the reason he went into hiding wasn't just because of the clergy. He was also doing things like denouncing the Iranian government, like the Shah. So it wasn't just the clergy he was denouncing. That's why he wanted to go into hiding. So the clergy is one aspect, and the clergy was I'm focusing on for this presentation, but there are far more people he's denouncing than just the clergy. This will become to the third wave of denouncements, because now this is where we start to get the fatwas coming in. This is where the Ayatollahs must start coming in. Because like Ayatollah Malani, he forbade his followers from attending Sahriati's lectures and called his works Zaleh, which is deceptive. They're saying, we're the clerics, we know what we're talking about, we've done this all our lives. This is not what Islam teaches. Other clerics declare his work against Shiite Islam and said they were haram, forbidden. So depending on which Ayatollah you followed, you weren't even allowed to reach al-Shariati's works because they were going after al-Shariati that much. Al-Shariati's response to these fatwas was, quote, Zionism's masters can win fatwas from certain Ayatollahs as easily as one can kiss a slut. So he did not agree with all these fatwas that were coming out against him. And during this time, al-Shariati was actually arrested, and even though he's sitting in prison, the Ayatollahs were still going after al-Shariati, and they're still denouncing him. And then not only that, they actually went out and they wanted to get al-Shariati's works completely banned from Iran and completely banned from Shiite Islam. That's how much they disliked al-Shariati. They even went about Ayatollah Montezari. He wrote a letter to Khomeini claiming that a large coalition of forces who have deviations tendencies intended to make him idol al-Shariati so that no cleric could oppose him. Because one major aspect of al-Shariati's works was the concept of martyrdom. Al-Shariati, he passed away at the age of 44. Officially, he passed away from a heart attack. Unofficially, many people thought he was assassinated. Again, it's the age of 44, so from a heart attack, it's not completely unheard of, but there's also a strong line of thought that he was assassinated. So you can make your own opinions about that. And so with his gaining of martyrdom, he was starting to really become an idol among many Iranian people. And the clerics thought that, hey, if he keeps going like this, we're not going to be able to oppose him. He's going to really abolish the clerical system and really turn Shiite Islam upside down. And so even though al-Shariati passed away, they still wanted to issue fatwas denouncing him. And they went to Ayatollah Khomeini to denounce Shariati. And so one of the accusations that a lot of the Ayatollahs went to about al-Shariati's works were al-Shariati's works were atheistic. Khomeini said that he reviewed al-Shariati's works and he said he did not find it substantiative. Because even though they disagreed with all Shariati was saying, this is clearly not atheistic. So Khomeini did not jump on that bandwagon going after Shariati. And also Khomeini also went so far as to say that al-Shariati's works were not un-Islamic, therefore they did not require a fatwa against him. So Khomeini did not jump on board with this. And so a lot of the clerics were really going after Shariati. They became very fearful that the person who was becoming leader of the Islamic Revolution was going to endorse al-Shariati and turn the version of Shiite Islam upside down. Khomeini said that he's not about to endorse al-Shariati, but also that said Shariati was doing a service. Because one aspect of al-Shariati's reinterpretation of Shiite Islam was revolutionary religion. He said that the people were supposed to rise up against injustice. So this was really starting to bring a lot of people out against the Shah of Iran. So Khomeini didn't want to go against that revolutionary movement, which was really benefiting him, but he also didn't want to endorse Shariati either, because Shariati was heavily endorsing the clerics. So Khomeini did this, he said he's going to skillfully sidestep Shariati's belief system so that he can continue to bring people against the Shah of Iran. Now, Even though he sidestepped them, Sahriati and Khomeini did not agree with each other on many things. Because when Sahriati spoke of concepts like knowledge, he was speaking in like a secular sense and a religious sense. Because Sahriati said that no, you're supposed to speak to everybody, not just the conservative clerics. Because let's use a previous example with women showing up in miniskirts to his lectures. Sahriati said there's no problem with that. You talk to everybody. The clerics were like, no, that's forbidden. You cannot do this. There are clear dress standards here. So when Sahriati spoke of knowledge, it was in one sense. When Khomeini spoke of knowledge, it was in a conservative clerical sense that was from the Safavid Empire. And Sahriati believed that it was the duty of Shiite Islam to protect the people from the ruling aristocracy. Khomeini believed, as a conservative cleric from the Safavid version, that it was the duty of the clerics to impose divine law on Iran and the world. So the sense of duty of what was supposed to happen was fundamentally different from each other. Another concept was justice, because justice to Sahriati, as I said before, was protecting the masses from the ruling aristocracy. Justice to Khomeini was imposing his version of divine law onto the masses, even if it meant brutally doing so. And so when they spoke of concepts like justice, knowledge, these were very different concepts that Khomeini spoke of versus what Sahriati spoke of. And this brought many people out against the Shah in the 1979 Islamic Revolution, eventually leading to clerical rule. And then once the clerics took power in Iran, the clerics banned the works of Ali Shariati, so you can no longer buy or sell his works in Iran, because they did not forget Ali Shariati's denunciations of them. And so, with that, we'll jump over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and Jabbar, you're not watching your phone. Yep. Thank you. Well, thank you all very much for coming out to our lecture, both through Zoom and in person. And thank you very much for the Center for the Study of the Middle East and Dr. Carl Pearson for hosting this wonderful lecture. And thank you to the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa, where Steve and I will be going in a few weeks. And thanks to our future co-panelists, Dr. Mohammed Aziz and Dr. Mark Zelinsky. Now, I will apologize to everyone. I do not have a PowerPoint, so I hope you can bear with me for the next 20 minutes. So my paper concerns the philosophy of Grand Ayatollah Montezari, widely regarded as the intellectual father of the dissident Green movement within Iran. And in many ways, his ideas are something of an interesting synthesis between the perspective of Khomeini and the perspectives of Sahriati. For in Iran, as we heard from Steve's example, when Iran entered the modern world in the early 20th century and then underwent rapid transformation throughout the early to mid 20th century, Iran witnessed multiple schools of thought, all of whom were attempting to grapple with the question of, okay, well, how do we take Iran into the modern world? What is the proper relationship between religion and government? And you had a number of perspectives from reactionary clergy to Marxists to the God-worshipping socialists, such associated with Sahriati. Now, Montezari, Ayatollah Montezari, actually began his career as one of Khomeini's right-hand men, and he was actually, for a time, considered to be Khomeini's designated successor. However, toward the end of Khomeini's life, Montezari denounced Khomeini for a number of reasons, which we'll get into in a little bit. And then he was stripped of his title as successor. And periodically, under the successive regime of Ayatollah Khomeini, Montezari routinely was placed under house arrest, where he developed his ideas essentially as a thorn in the side to the current ruling administration. Now, just to get into the notion of Islamic modernism, scholar Asma Afsaruddin, in her book, First Muslims, examines both the history of the earliest Muslims and their memory in contemporary political discourses in the Islamic world. Specifically, it highlights how multiple differing schools of thought in the contemporary Muslim world have attempted to understand with the letter and spirit of the earliest generations, and seeing how their examples can influence modern solutions. And especially there's been a dichotomy in the modern world between modernists and Islamists, and namely several concepts which were endorsed by modernist Muslims include a general support for a democratic and pluralistic system of government, a respect for minority rights, including for minorities who do not qualify as Ahl Kitab or people of the book, support for rights for women. And even though while many modernists and many reformists do not necessarily advocate for a conception of secularism, which is akin to a Western understanding of a wall between church and state, many of them have very loose and open interpretation of Sharia law. And this is contrasted with the Islamist perspective, which generally, and even though many Islamists openly do profess support for a democratic government, and in various more secularized nations, which are Muslim majority, Islamists have and in fact do participate in the electoral process. Islamists generally support a very strict interpretation of their own version of Sharia law and do not want to allow much room for open interpretation. And from their very strict interpretation of Sharia law, this generally includes the enforcement of traditional notions such as a second-class status upon the Ahl Kitab and no recognition for the rights of those who do not fall outside of the classical Jewish, Christian, or the Iranian case, Zoroastrian classification, as well as very strict enforced gender roles, which include status of men, of women, and the suppression of speech and lifestyles which are deemed a threat to the moral fabric of society, such as the ideas which support things like atheism or agnosticism or homosexuality are to be suppressed and not allowed to have a place in society. Now, this is not necessary. This is not, especially as we shall see, with and also another key point with modernists use, and just to tie this back, is that Muslim modernists, those who endorse democracy, are one of their favorite conceptions from Islamic history is the notion of shura or consultation, and this method of consultation, which draws from the earliest Muslims who used the shura system to appoint Abu Bakr, Omar, and Uthman in the Sunni tradition, and was used in later precedents in the Islamic world in terms of having consensus from scholars and experts to solve a problem. This is seen as a predecessor of democracy, and this is what is advocated for by Muslim modernists. Now, just to highlight what I was going to say is that, of course, this is not a perfect black and white distinction. It's not as if there's one faction which says we're Islamists and we have these ideas, and we're modernists, we have these ideas. These ideas can in fact get blurry, and there's certainly a lot of interlap between these two. And on this note, as we jump into talking both about Montezari's intellectual biography, as well as getting into what constitutes the core of his ideas, I want to harken back to Stephen's lecture to talk about the distinction between Sahriati and Khomeini. And when Stephen was discussing how Sahriati says, well, the masses have the right to rule, and the masses can interpret Islam for themselves, and we can discard these superstitions that are not really associated with Islam. And when you have Khomeini, who, even though he was a very innovative thinker in his own right, he is best classified as an Islamist for Khomeini's core ideas is that, well, the clerics need to rule society. There needs to be the Baraya Faqih, a supreme jurist who has authority over all things, and every other position in the Iranian government which has power are those who have a clerical background. So here with Sahriati and Khomeini, we see a very strong dichotomy between modernism and Islamism. Now, for Grand Ayatollah Montezari, I think the best classification for him would be a unique description of being a traditional modernist. For we'll be able to see how he appeals to Islamic tradition, and he was very well steeped in. He was himself a source of emulation in the Islamic world. For we use the term Grand Marshal Taqlid, and just for anyone who might not know what that means, In Shiite Islam, the lay believer is supposed to gain their follow the religious advice of a learned scholar who's qualified to give it. And so Montezari was very well educated in the Shiite tradition. He's a Shiite cleric, and a lot of his ideas do come from traditional Shiite methodology, but he also completely reinterpreted and made many innovative arguments in Shiite discourse. And the quote scholar Ali Paya in his book, Iraq, Democracy and the Future of the Muslim World, he says, quote, Grand Ayatollah Montezari is a modernist. He is also an internalist advocate of the compatibility of Islam and democracy. He maintains that there are only difference between an Islamic system of government and a democratic system of government is over a point which pertains to the form rather than the content of the two systems. That is to say, in an Islamic system, the legitimacy of the government ultimately derives from Allah, whereas in a democracy, people are the ultimate sources of legitimation. And all other aspects of the two systems are effectively similar. Now, to give a brief background of Montezari's life, he was born into a clerical family. He was educated within Islamic seminaries, and after rising, he eventually earned the rank of Ayatollah. And in the 60s, he was a very vocal opponent of the Shah. And like many other critics of the Shah's regime, he was placed in prison. Now, it's interesting that at this time, when there was a lot of opposition to the Shah, there was a lot of disconnect between these disparate parties, because you had Marxists who were influenced by Marx, Lenin, and Mao, and wanted to turn Iran into a people's republic. And then you had reactionaries who were opposed to the Shah confiscating land from the clergy. Now, Montezari, when he went to prison, was exposed, like many other clerics, to the writings of people like Marx and Lenin and Mao, and which profoundly influenced Montezari's thinking. And while in prison, he made connections to particularly Islamic socialists, and he specifically built bridges with the Mushahideen al-Khalq, a self-proclaimed Muslim Marxist group who played a key role in overthrowing the Shah and assisting Khomeini, even though later they had, of course, a very massive falling out and ended up defecting to Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War. And so Montezari, from behind bars, was very influential in helping bring these disparate communities together to develop a common narrative, which combined Islamic theology with socialistic thinking. Now, after Khomeini's ascension to power, Montezari had a direct role in helping draft the initial Iranian constitution, and he was widely perceived as being one of Khomeini's right-hand men. And it's interesting to note that throughout the entirety of the early to mid-80s, Montezari was often held up as being the most likely candidate to succeed Khomeini as supreme leader. For in the early period, when Khomeini first authorized the referendum to declare Iran an Islamic Republic, it faced considerable opposition from other Ayatollahs within Iran, who said this notion of clerical rule is a violation of Shiite principles, which say that we're supposed to wait for the reappearance of Imam. And Montezari was very vocal in helping Khomeini marginalize some of these critical voices, such as Ayatollah Shariat Madari and Ayatollah Khomeini. And then later, later during the course of the Iran-Iraq War, when Saddam initially, in the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War, Saddam Hussein invaded Khuzestan, hoping to annex Abadan, the only Arab majority province in Iran, under the assumption that the Iranian Arabs would welcome the chance to be part of an Arab country. And of course, he was wrong. And so Saddam was fairly easily repelled from Iran with an offer of a peace deal to go back to the status quo. And Khomeini refused, and then counter-invaded Iraq and escalated the war for about almost a decade, attempting to remove Saddam from power. But even when Khomeini launched his counterattack, it was also very controversial within Iran, and it was very controversial amongst Iran's religious community. For many other Ayatollahs, and even Ayatollah Rafsanjani, and even Ali Khamenei himself are on record for expressing reservations over Khomeini's decision to counterattack Iraq. However, Montezari was very vocal in being a supporter of the Iraq War and helping marginalize critical voices and assisting Khomeini in advocating for support in going to war against Saddam. And Montezari also spent much of his time and made many public statements supporting many of Khomeini's ideas, such as support for pan-Islamism, of building a greater pan-Islamic unity project, uniting Sunnis and Shiites against the common enemy of all Muslims, namely America and Israel and the Soviet Union, per the thinking of Khomeini and Montezari. Now, things began to change towards the end of the Iran-Iraq War. For in the aftermath, Khomeini authorized the executions of countless numbers of political prisoners under the basis that these political prisoners were members of the Mujahideen al-Khalq who had committed treason against Iran during the war. And Montezari stated, Islam is a religion of justice. Montezari stated that according to Islam, no one should be without due process deprived of their life, or liberty, or property. And Khomeini had no right to, even if they were members of the MEK, if they couldn't be proven that in a court of law, Khomeini had no right to execute them. And these warrantless executions were acts of criminal barbarism and not Sharia law. And furthermore, during Khomeini's very famous death sentence issued against Salman Rushdie and his call to execute anyone who even helped publishing the book, of course, many clerics were silent, but Montezari very publicly voiced his opposition to Khomeini's fatwa. And Montezari said, look, all Khomeini's fatwa has done is turn Iran and the Islamic world at large to an international laughingstock, and that we're perceived as being a nation of bad men and murderers, not enlightened civilization, which is what we ought to be promoting ourselves as. So because of these views, he was stripped of his title of succession, and then the media largely at this point stopped referring to him as Marja Taqlid or Ayatollah. They tried to bury him as much as possible, but his influence in Iran was so great, his supporters still refer to him as the Marja Taqlid, him as Grand Ayatollah. So the government Khomeini, especially after Khomeini, Khamenei could not execute him, because if it did, it would have spelled doom for the regime, for it would have turned him into a martyr. So Khamenei had no choice but just to put him under house arrest and let him give books and speeches critical of his regime. Now, in the time I have remaining, I want to get into two aspects which really cut to the core of Montezari being a traditional modernist. One of his invoking of the concept of Marja Taqlid, his support for it was vital to his support for separation of powers. For Montezari and his support for the institution of Marja Taqlid, he said that because Islam had always had a open and a polycentric approach to law with a multitude of ayatollahs, this prevented what became in Iran under Khomeini and Khamenei, which is the centralization of power under one figure. He says this, a true Marja system serves to check power, and it serves to stand as a safeguard against human rights abuses, not as a means of oppressing anyone. And just to quote Montezari directly from an interview he gave 2 hours at the end of his life, quote, "Thus, in such an arrangement, the system of government will come under the control of marjiyat, only insofar as compliance within Islamic criteria is concerned. And this is only natural, removing the conflict between the marjiyat and the political leadership. This was a summary of a general plan, which needs to be explicated in further more detail. The most important point to be highlighted here is that Islam is for the separation of powers and does not recognize the concentration of power in the hand of a fallible human being, and this is in accordance with reason." Now, also from this notion, he very periodically denounced Khamenei for Khamenei's insistence that he should be portrayed as supreme leader of Shiites worldwide. And it's very common in Iranian propaganda put out by the Iranian government to portray Khamenei as being the spiritual leader of Shiites in Iraq and Azerbaijan and Bahrain and Yemen and Syria, and as well as all of Iran. Montezari routinely denounced Khamenei, saying this is a violation of the principles which Marja Taqlid is supposed to protect against. And furthermore, he, even while under house arrest, He publicly also expressed his disagreement with both Shariati and with another prominent Iranian thinker named Abul Karim Saroush, both who have criticized the system of Marj Taqlid and the clerical system of the Shiite Islam, in addition to attacking Khamenei and his consolidations of power. Montezari also publicly critiqued Iranian dissident intellectuals and reformists who have attacked the system entirely. Now, with regard, what's most interesting, which can point to his support for modernism, is that recalling what was said about the institution of shura, the concept of shura and democratic government is at the core of Montezari's political philosophy. And this is very atypical for Shiite Islam. For the concept of the shura is often invoked by Sunni modernists to say, well, democracy is how Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman were chosen. But in Shiite Islam, the imams are both the spiritual and temporal leaders. And this shura system that led to the election of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman was not a righteous election. It was an illegal coup d'etat by satanic beasts who betrayed the rightful successor of the prophet after poisoning the prophet himself. And so the shura system was for the election of the first caliphs was viciously attacked. So Montezari's embracing of it is a very interesting modernist adaptation. Now, Montezari, in his support for the shura, made several claims. He said, well, number one, the notion of a Khalif Allah, the vice prince of law, this is a position which applies to all of humanity and not just one single individual or group of individuals. And furthermore, he argues that the main purposes of the prophets and the imams was to provide spiritual guidance, leadership, not political leadership. He insists that the form of government which existed during this time period was truly a system of consultation with various tribes. Now, to quote Montezari again, quote, God has created the human being, the natural impulse of election, commanding to those worshiping him this natural impulse. Election is the best criterion. God has said, give glad tidings to those who worship me, those who hear the word and follow it, what it best contains. And he says that all governments which do not have a concept of consultation and does not have a rule and a proper democratic rule by the people is illegitimate because it violates this Quranic principle of consultation. And on that note, I have just officially gone over the 20-minute mark. So I will now just conclude by saying that in understanding the spectrum of Islamism and modernism, Montezari can best be looked at as something of Hegelian synthesis, between the two, and that his the best description for him is his own unique classification of traditional modernism and his place within contemporary Islamic debates, and specifically within this perennial debate within the history of Shiite Islam, involving the paradox of power. And on that note, I will thank you all again, and I guess I will turn the mic over to Dr. Carl Pearson, who hopefully can kick us off in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so we do have some time for questions. If you are online and you would like to ask a question, if you raise your hand, I can unmute you, and or you can leave it in the chat. If you're live here in the audience, you can simply speak up. Shayar, did you have a question?
Yes,
Oh, you're muted, I believe, or maybe you might be muted.
I am not. Can you hear me?
Do we hear you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, it's good to see these two gentlemen, former students, and that they are so passionate about what's happening in the country. I had questions and comments. I think the issue of Islamic socialism is really something that we have to think. These are two terms that they go against each other. So maybe we have to find a different term to refer to this. Maybe the people have come to the point to realize that there's maybe modernity would be a good sense. Again, we have to talk about what modernity means. It's important to think about it. And so it seems to me that you know, we covered like 500 years of history of Iran in 10 minutes, who said what. Do we really think that, you know, the fact that Safavid came to power was just because of competition with the Ottomans? Are there not other issues there? You know, the Sufism, I think that was very important, as we know that, you know, his grandfather was not, you know, he was the head of the Sufi order. So there were other issues involved. Central Asia was involved. As you know, I mean, the Safavid, they themselves, they were of Turkic background, and they had a lot of Turkmens who were working with them, and later on they got rid of them. So think about it. My question is that, you know, we are in 21st century. And as we are speaking here, gathering here, and we give the talks, and, you know, things are changing in Iran. Obviously, whatever Khomeini, Montezari, and Shariati, all of them, they said it's not working. That's the point. The point is that, you know, what if Montezari would have succeeded Khomeini? Do you think that's a situation that would have been solved? I mean, that is the main question. The question is that what is the next step? And because these people, they have their own interpretation of Islam, and they are not willing to accept the division of the civil society with their religious belief. And that is what the problem is here, that women, they have suffered for so many years. The nation has suffered for so many years. You don't have to be a woman. Women had a double suffrage, no doubt about it. But economy, joblessness, people cannot get married. I mean, this housing, you know, and corruption. I mean, so if you had Montezari, I'm not sure it would have changed, because these are all the same clique that they work together. They have certain view of what Islam or any religion might be. In our society in America, we have, you know, certain way of looking at things. So when those people grab the power, they are going to move the society in the direction that they want. That is not going to, I think that obviously what's happening in Iran is not working. Maybe Shariati was thinking that, you know, he initiated the idea that we should really consider, you know, separating the civil society, the way that society is functioning, from the, you know, 1400 years, you know, way of life in the past. Okay, I'm going to stop here.
Well, thank you, Dr. Danishkar. Great question, and thank you for showing up. Now, there's certainly a lot to unpack in your question, but I mean, I think to focus on what the relevance to, I think your question relevant to my paper about Montezari. Well, it's obviously you can't really know what happened if, and also the concept of succeeding Khomeini and having absolute power. Well, I mean, there's the old saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it doesn't matter who. You could take the most virtuous person in the world, and if you, as per, of course, I mean, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the Stanford prison experiment. You take the most virtuous person in the world, you give them absolute authority over anyone or anything, the power will go to their heads, and they will become, you know, corrupted. So had Montezari succeeded Khomeini, if he had, you know, the powers of Khomeini at his fingertips, would things have, you know, would he have just devolved into, you know, just another dictator? That's possible. Or at the same time, because, you know, it is often been said that the key difference between Khomeini and Khamenei and their regimes is that Khamenei doesn't have two things. And the current whoever succeeds Khomeini, would have succeeded Khomeini, whatever supreme leader comes after, who came after Khomeini, will lack two things of Khomeini, and that was charisma and absolute power. Because, you know, Khomeini created a deliberately very complex system of government, which nobody understands how it actually works. Because you think that, you know, it's a system of loops and checks and balances that you don't really know who's supposed to trump who. And it was done on purpose by Khomeini to make sure that he couldn't be, and no one could turn against him. And right now, the Iranian government's always been, under Khamenei has been a disorganized mess because various factions are arguing this, right, the other thing. Now, but would things, I mean, if we just take Montezari's ideas at face value, would things be different? Well, I think that as assuming that the power wouldn't corrupt absolutely, I think things probably would likely have been different. I honestly think that obviously Montezari would not have what he would have removed the death sentence against Salman Rushdie, which he had opposed. I don't think we'd be seeing as much persecution of I think that the laws which discriminate against women and make women second-class citizens in Iran, probably would not exist. And it's true, Montezari was on record for espousing, traditional attitudes towards gender, but he was definitely much more open to reform than many other clerics were. And another thing I didn't really get into is the notion of Khomeini's Montezari's support for the rights of religious minorities, because also towards the end of his life, Montezari was one of the few clerics to openly condemn persecution of the Baha'is. And actually, in my paper, I have a quote that I didn't get to from Montezari, where he specifically said that even though Baha'is are not recognized as members of the divinely revealed religion, Baha'is, being that they're human beings, are still entitled to Islamic compassion. And Montezari also denounced, state goon squads bursting into people's homes and, raiding them without warrant, raiding them without any kind of warrant or probable cause. And Montezari specifically condemned, this is another part of the paper I didn't unfortunately have time to get to, but Montezari condemned the surveillance society, which existed under Khomeini and Khamenei. And he said that, human beings, for the most, in most cases, they should be allowed to make their own mistakes. They should be allowed to make sin and then come back and repent on their own accord. Now, of course, this is not to say that Montezari believes in a system of separation of religion and civil society like what exists in the United States, or because that idea is a distinctly Western concept that doesn't really have any kind of precedence anywhere else. But I think if we just look at Montezari's ideas, if he could have been in a position to implement them, I think we would be in a much better position right now. Perhaps it would be just as easy to travel to Iran today from the United States, or as it would be to travel to Israel or Turkey or to the UK. And we wouldn't have such bloody protests in Iran right now. That's the thing, is that Allahu Alam, God only knows. And I don't know, Stephen, do you want to have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd love it. Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Professor. I'm going to kind of agree and disagree with Alex here a little bit, because going up to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Khomeini promised the same thing that Shahriati promised. The clerics will not rule Iran. Women will not be forced with hijab. You will have freedom of religion. But once Khomeini took power in Iran, he went back on all the promises, and Montezari went back on the promises with him. So I think he probably was more liberal than Khomeini was when he took power. But I still think it was still built on the same cracked foundation, that they went back on all the promises that they made in the revolution. Plus, also, let's go back to him with the Iran-Iraq War. In 1982, they were telling Khomeini that he needs to stop this war. You're not going to be able to defeat Saddam. Khomeini let the war go on for another 6 years until 500,000 Iranians were killed in this war. So, yes, there probably would have been more changes if Montezari took power, because we also saw this, like President Khatami, he was a reformist. Rafsanjani, he was a moderate. So you still saw the reformers and moderates try to take power, and they were still unable to change the system because it's built off the same cracked foundation that this is not what the Iranians were promised in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. So there would have been a different path, but the end result would have been the same.
My name is Askar Garakhan. Just reminds me of my younger years. I attended Dr. Shariati lecture a few times when I was student, University of Tehran student. He was attracting a lot of Mujahideen Khalq, sympathizers, and maybe members. But the clergy, Khomeini, Khamenei, they're attracting bazaris, all the merchants and ordinary people. So learn something and remind me of some great lectures, great understanding. But my question is right now, the things going on in Iran, and I have a trip plan going on. Just want to see what you guys think are going to happen with all these more than 200 young are already dead, killed, and no one knows. I get messages from Iran, from nephews, nieces, friends, and because internet was down too. For what, every time I get a few hours, come I get the message. So what do you guys think? What's going to happen? It's going to be another revolution?
Thank you for the question, and it's certainly it's great. Of course, in Islam we have the concept of silsila, chain of narration. So it's great to have someone who met Sahriati in the presence with us today. Well, I mean, it's so I think that what's going to happen in Iran is, I guess, contingent upon a lot of factors. I think for me, and this is kind of shifting gears a little bit, but I think it's imperative that the United States not try to interfere, because I think that there's a cycle in Iranian protests in the last at least the last 10 years, or maybe the last 20 years, is that the people are protesting, and however something happens which basically makes people more mad at America than they are at the government. Like if we're looking back a few years ago with the killing of General Soleimani, I mean, we were right before that we were facing similar situations in Iran where the government was shut down, very similar actions were being taken, and it looked like the IRI might fall. But after the death of Soleimani, who had been a decorated war hero of the Iran-Iraq War, who even for Iranians who hated the regime, he was still a widely respected war hero, for the same reason why Democrats respect John McCain. This just brought the population in a yo-yo back to the arms of the supreme leader, and it also basically made those who were advocating reproach to America look like fools, or similar how back in Stephen mentioned Khatami in his presidency, but the real failure of that was George Bush's decision to declare Iran part of the axis of evil, because of course Khatami won in a landslide in '99. He promised numerous reforms, and it looked like he was delivering on them, and it looked like writing on the wall in 2002, due to some negotiations the Clinton administration from the previous Clinton administration, or I mean before it looked like the writing on the wall in the Clinton administration was that by the late 2000s we'd have a reconciliation between Iran and America. Of course, 9/11 brought Iran and America into being military partners because Iran and America collaborated in fighting against the Taliban. But George Bush, in his infinite wisdom, decided to say, "Oh, Iran's part of the axis of evil, and we're gonna, turn to prior state again." So Ahmadinejad was able to humiliate the reformists, saying, "Hey, look, you tried negotiating with America, and then they screwed you over. So you know what? If you vote, so let's go back to our roots of being anti-American and remember Khomeini's struggle, because I never forget, the support in '53 for the Mossadegh overthrow, never support the chemical weapons Ronald Reagan sold to Iraq, never forget the airline passenger America shot down." So I guess this is kind of shifting gears. I'm not sure if this was relevant to what you're asking, but I think what's going to happen in Iran is contingent upon America's actions. If America, stays on the sidelines and lets it unfold on its own, I think that Iran, we'll hopefully see, either major changes, or we'll see maybe something analogous. I mean, of course, this might be a pipe dream, but it's maybe something analogous which happened in Tunisia, best case example, which is probably the only example of a Middle Eastern country in the last 10, 15 years to successfully transition from a dictatorship to democracy. I guess that's best case scenario, but worst case scenario is that there's a some kind of drone strike by America against an Iranian target, and it pushes Iranians back in the arms of the regime, or worse, situations escalate and it breaks out into a war. So that's my I guess my answer is that what's going to happen in Iran is contingent upon the actions of the American government.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think what's going to happen in Iran, because let's take the start of 1988, for example. Khomeini executed 30,000 political prisoners. 2009, everyone knows Ahmadinejad rigged that election. They sent the besieged on Revolutionary Guards out to brutally suppress the Iranians. Especially Khomeini, they publicly hang people from cranes. Go back to 2019, they turned the internet off. That way they could send the Revolutionary Guards out and besiege to go brutally suppress them again. Brutal suppression is nothing new to the Islamic government in Iran. They've done this ever since the Khomeini took power. So unless the Iranian people are willing to actually start fighting back, they're just going to keep sending the guards out. They're going to send Hezbollah out. They're going to send besiege out, and they're just going to keep brutally suppressing them until they're basically beat down, can't do anything. So right now, yes, it's been going on for over a month, and every day there's just more footage coming back with like the Revolutionary Guard, besiege. They're using live ammunition against them. So I don't think it's less what America does. I think it's more what the Iranian people decide to do. If they decide to fight back for their freedom, they will be free. If they don't fight back for their freedom, they're just going to, the besieged guards of Hezbollah and the Shia militias, they're just going to keep coming in and keep brutally suppressing them.
Just one, sorry.
I just want to make a comment. I disagree with what you said, Alex, with all due respect. Just personally think that when we say that what is going to happen in Iran is contingent upon America's involvement, I think that's kind of an imperialistic perspective, to be honest. And it kind of disregards the power that Iranian people have. And so I just disagree with that. I mean, it's too late for America to be outside the Middle East. It's the sad reality. But first we have to consider what Iranian people are capable of before saying that America's involvement is needed there.
Well, I was saying is that I'm not saying when I said America's involvement is I wasn't saying America's involvement is I wasn't saying that America should. I mean, I was saying the opposite. I said that as long as America sits it out, which and does not intervene in it, that's going to affect the course of the outcome. And that's not saying that that's not saying Iran needs America by any stretch of imagination. That's just the reality that the United States in Iranian media right now has basically used the 1984 George Orwell's terminology. It has the Goldstein effect, because if you've read 1984 and when George Orwell drew upon examples in the Soviet Union with Trotsky or any wars, that you always have an enemy who's demonized. The government always says, okay, it doesn't matter what we do to you, these guys here are workers. And of course it happened in America. It still happens in America now. And of course, we all remember what happened after 9/11 when, George Bush could, strip away America's civil liberties, launch a war against Iraq. And nobody complained because it was all under the guise of fighting terrorism. And so this is the fact, though, if you read, press TV and look at Iranian propaganda, it's always, whatever we do, it's all in the interest of protecting you from America. And this is a fact that, going back before, is that you're looking at the protests after Soleimani, there was a yo-yo of protests against the regime and a yo-yo of protests in favor of the regime against America after Soleimani was killed. And of course, some people try to kind of do some mental gymnastics to say that, those protesters protesting, killing Soleimani were all just forced to by the government, but the government can't just all of a sudden flip a switch and turn all the anti-regime protesters into pro-regime protesters, with a light switch. I mean, and think about it this way: the election, George Bush could not have been elected re-elected in 2004 if it hadn't been for 9/11, if it hadn't been for Bin Laden. But that didn't mean that America needs Bin Laden. I mean, it was just an expression. It's just an expression that the American foreign policy is, our diplomacy with Iran is going to be one of the most important decisions, and whether or not we can make or break whether or not the protests succeed. And again, in my perspective, the best thing we can do is to not intervene militarily and to work on ending the sanctions and restoring the Iranian nuclear deal. That way, you're taking away the Goldstein effect. If you're taking away, by being a good faith actor, the United States basically eliminates the biggest part of its propaganda, which is we're protecting you from America. Because every time America does something which is perceived to harm Iran, the government has basically another feather in their cap to saying, look, we're protecting you against American imperialism. So I didn't mean to come out and say that Iran needs the United States one way or the other. I'm just looking at examining what I've studied about the opinion polls on the ground.
But as you know, that people in Iran do not buy the discourse, the rhetoric where the government says we are protecting you from America.
Well, I mean, many don't, but there are certainly some who do.
Well, yeah.
I mean, you can't, and that's another thing, is Iranian society, just like any other, society. It's a spectrum of perspectives. And you're saying, well, people don't buy it now, they're not buying it. But I would say that, but again, if you look at the parallels to 2019, the killing of Soleimani, it wasn't hard for someone who would, be who wouldn't buy the rhetoric to buy into it after killing Soleimani.
So people reacted to it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm saying that the best thing, exactly, it's not surprising. That's my entire point. That's my entire point, right? Exactly. That, that's why the best thing the United States can do is set out is basically not interfere internally in the affairs of Iran, and that will have the best outcome for leading to a collapse or of Khamenei's leadership.
Also, a lot of the current Iranian scholars or intellectuals who are from Iran and they do research in this topic, they also try to clarify the line between what's happening with the nuclear deal and the sanctions and what's happening right now in Iran. So it matters, but not 100% of what's exactly happening.
Oh, yeah, it's not 100%.
We need to make the distinction between the two.
I think it's kind of a gray area, and where exactly do we draw the lines in the gray area? It's kind of a red.
Exactly, it's gray area. I mean, of course, I'm sure there's probably a lot of protesters who don't care at all one way about the nuclear deal. They're just unemployed and they don't have enough to feed their families. But there's certainly a lot. I think the nuclear deal does still weigh on minds heavily of many Iranians, just like it still weighs, just like how a foreign policy with respect to Iran weighs in the mind of not all, but certainly a lot of Americans. Just like the potential for war and where your tax dollars are going and whether or not you're going to be blown up in a war tomorrow I think affects almost everyone.
So maybe like the protests that happened, I think in the fall of 2019, those could have been more relevant to the nuclear deal or the sanctions, but the ones that's happening right now.
Oh yeah, the ones happening right now
officers have not-
are necessarily affected by the nuclear deal. I'm just saying that, if the US did something stupid, like kill another top Iranian military general in the next, couple months, we would see, a lot of the population yo-yoing back around Iran, the Supreme Leader, and that's my perspective.
Thank you for saying that if US did another stupid thing such as.
We have time for one last question. There's one a follow-up to this discussion online from Katie Scott. You've been discussing how the US should not be involved, which I agree with and understand. I've watched many videos from young Iranian women participating in the protests and begging for people in the US to pay attention and advocate for their rights in the US. Is there any hope for soft power in US-Iranian relations, or how should we react to these videos?
Thank you very much for the question. To answer your question directly, I don't think that there is any hope for soft power. Because remember, the Islamic Republic of Iran, they are the #1 killer of Americans pre and post 9/11. They were funding all these insurgencies against us in Iraq. We were barely fighting the Iraqis. We were mostly fighting the insurgent militias funded by Iran. Because like Muqtada al-Sadr, he was trained in seminary schools in Qom, Iran. So I don't think there's going to be much hope for soft power regarding Iran. Regarding the protests, yes, we definitely need to spread awareness. As far as getting involved, I think that we should be encouraging the Iranians to really fight for the freedom, but I don't think that we should, beyond dialogue and speaking, we think that we should take a really large aspect in getting directly involved. Because this is going to be up to the Iranian people on how they decide their issues. And as I said earlier, brutality is nothing new to the Islamic Republic of Iran. They're going to keep cracking down. It's going to be on the Iranian people to really decide their own destiny at the end of the day.
And I would like to add saying that I'm going to back what Stephen said. I think everything he said right there is accurate.
Okay, well, before I wrap things up, I just want to let everyone know that there are 2 additional graduate student panels coming later this semester. So stay tuned for that. There are also 2 more discussions of Iranian issues coming in the next 2 weeks. Next Wednesday at 5 p.m. I think you should look at Sesame's website. There's a conversation among some IU faculty, Iranian IU faculty, about the current situation in Iran. So stay tuned, and with that, please help join me in thanking our presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you.